Why was she the only one not laughing when the briefing room filled with noise? The men around the table leaned back in their chairs, boots stretched out, jokes bouncing off the concrete walls like loose brass. Someone had cracked a comment about soft assignments. Someone else said her like it was a punchline. She didn't look up from the satellite image glowing on the screen. She didn't need to. She'd heard this tone before. Dismissal disguised as confidence. Certainty built on nothing solid. They thought she was support, logistics, a placeholder until a real shooter arrived. No one asked why she'd been added to a Tier 1 extraction mission at the last minute. No one asked why Command had 3 objections to keep her on the team. And no one noticed the way her hands were still. Too still. Like someone who had already run this scenario in their head 100 times. The objective was simple on paper. Infiltrate a collapsed industrial zone outside the city. Retrieve a high-value asset before a hostile militia moved him. By dawn, clean lines, tight windows, nothing heroic, nothing flashy. But something felt wrong. She felt it in the pauses between words, in the way the intel officer avoided her eyes, in the way the team leader skimmed over her role, overwatch, and contingency like it was an afterthought. She had learned long ago that being ignored could be more dangerous than being challenged. She was a sniper by trade, an operator by necessity, and a woman who had survived environments that didn't want her there. As the briefing wrapped, one of the men leaned toward another and muttered, not quietly enough, "Girls don't fight, they freeze." She wrote it down in her head, not out of anger, out of memory. Because she knew what came after underestimation. And she also knew that when things went wrong, and they always did, 15 minutes could change everything. She didn't correct them, didn't defend herself, didn't announce credentials or past missions. Silence had taught her more than words ever had. And silence was exactly what she was about to use. Why did the night feel heavier the moment their boots hit the ground? The insertion went smooth, too smooth. The city was a skeleton, half-built towers, shattered windows, the smell of old fire and rust. She took her position on a collapsed rooftop, rifle settling into her shoulder like it belonged there. Below her, the team moved fast, confident, loud in the way only people who hadn't been burned yet could be. Her scope cut the world into fragments, angles, heat signatures, breathing. She caught movement 2 blocks out, not random, coordinated, watching. She keyed her mic, "We're not alone." The team lead acknowledged but didn't slow. "Copy, probably scavengers." "Probably." She tracked the movement again, counted silhouettes, 6, no more, they were being funneled. Her chest tightened, the kind of anxiety that didn't spike, didn't panic, just settled in like gravity. This was the part no one prepared you for, the moment where instinct whispered and protocol argued back. She trusted instinct. "Recommend halt," she said. "We're walking into a net." Static, a pause, then a chuckle over comms. "Relax, we've got this." She closed her eyes for half a second, just enough to lock something away. The familiar feeling of being unheard, of knowing what was coming and being powerless to stop it. Then the first shot rang out. The street erupted, muzzle flashes from windows. A rocket screamed past her position and detonated behind the team. The radio exploded with shouting, orders, panic. She moved without waiting. Targets lined up in her scope. She didn't rush, didn't spray. Every shot was deliberate, measured, a conversation between breath and trigger. She dropped 2 shooters before the team even realized where the fire was coming from. Below, chaos. One man went down hard, leg, blood everywhere. Another froze behind cover, breathing too fast. Someone yelled her, not mocking now, needing. She felt the shift, the moment when perception broke. "Overwatch," the team lead shouted. "We're pinned." "I know," she said, calm, almost gentle. "I've got you." And she did. But the fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. Why did the silence after the firefight feel more dangerous than the gunfire? They regrouped in a half-burned factory, dragging the wounded, locking doors that wouldn't hold if tested hard enough. The asset was still inside. The militia was adapting. And the team, now bleeding, shaken, was finally looking at her like she'd always deserved. One of them wouldn't meet her eyes. Another muttered an apology he didn't quite understand yet. She didn't acknowledge either. She checked ammo, checked angles, calculated time. 15 minutes, she thought. That's all it ever takes. The enemy pushed hard, coordinated, angry now. She moved off Overwatch and into the building, rifle slung, sidearm out. Close quarters, no room for ego, just work. A man lunged from behind a pillar. She redirected his momentum, drove him into concrete, disarmed him without thinking. Muscle memory layered over years of training most people never saw. The others watched her differently now, not impressed, not inspired. Aware. When the last hostile fell and the extraction bird thundered overhead, the mission felt less like a victory and more like a reckoning. On the flight out, no one spoke. She stared at her hands, steady, familiar. She wasn't proud, pride was loud. She felt something quieter, something heavier. Relief, maybe, or grief for how close it had come. Or for how often it always did. Why did the apology come when it no longer mattered? Back at base, medical took the wounded. Command debriefed, footage reviewed, praise distributed carefully, formally, like rations. Later, one of the men found her outside, sitting on a crate, helmet beside her. "I was wrong," he said. She waited. "I didn't think you," he stopped, swallowed. "I didn't think you could do that." She looked at him then, really looked, saw the discomfort, the cracked assumption, the beginning of learning. "I know," she said. He flinched. "That's it. That's enough." Because the point was never to humiliate, never to dominate, never to prove superiority. It was survival. It was competence. It was doing the job when the world expected you to fail. Why do some lessons only arrive through consequence? Weeks later, the report would circulate, training protocols updated, language adjusted, names removed quietly from teams. Her name stayed. She kept working, kept training, kept showing up where she was least expected. Not because she wanted to teach men lessons, but because somewhere out there, another woman would be underestimated at the worst possible moment. And if this story reached her, if it reached anyone, maybe it would buy her 15 minutes. Enough time to act. Enough time to live. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did her pulse stay calm when everyone else started breathing too fast? The first explosion echoed down the street like a door slamming on fate. Concrete dust rolled upward, swallowing the glow of the team's night optics, turning clean lines into chaos. Someone yelled her again, louder this time, stripped of humor, stripped of doubt. The sound of confidence breaking apart always had a certain pitch to it. She recognized it instantly. She didn't answer right away. Not because she didn't hear them, but because she was already moving. Her body shifted before her mind finished the thought. Years of repetition took over. Knee planted, shoulder settled, cheek against stock. The world narrowed into a tunnel of breathing, heartbeat, and glass. The rifle felt like an extension of her spine, steady, familiar, honest. Below her, the team scattered for cover that barely deserved the name. A burned-out transport, a shattered storefront, a low wall that wouldn't stop much more than hope. She watched one of them freeze in the open, confusion locking his limbs as rounds cracked past his head. Freeze response. Predictable. Human. She exhaled slowly. First shot. Clean. One heat signature disappeared. Second shot followed almost immediately. The enemy shooter hadn't expected counterfire from above. Most people didn't look up when panic hit. That mistake ended lives. Her radio clicked again. We're pinned multiple directions. I see them, she said finally. Her voice was level, almost quiet. You're being herded east. They want you inside. There was a pause. The team leader hesitated just long enough for her to know he was recalculating everything he thought he knew. Can you cover a push? He asked. Not can you try. Not do you think. Can you? Yes, she said. No drama, no edge, just fact. But you need to move when I say move, not when you feel ready. Another explosion closer now. Shrapnel pinged off metal somewhere below her position. She adjusted her angle, rolled to her side, already planning her next relocation. Staying still was death. Staying underestimated had always been her advantage. She scanned again. They were good. Not elite, but disciplined. Enough training to coordinate, enough numbers to overwhelm, and enough confidence to assume the woman above them was an anomaly, not a threat. She punished that assumption. Each shot wasn't just removal, it was communication. Pressure here, silence there. She wasn't trying to kill everyone. She was shaping the battlefield, bending it just enough to create a narrow escape. Now, she said into the mic. The team moved, fast this time. No hesitation. One of them dragged the wounded man with surprising strength, adrenaline burning through pain. Another laid down suppressive fire that wasn't pretty but was earnest. They trusted her now. That trust weighed more than her rifle. She shifted positions again, rolling off the rooftop moments before a round shattered the concrete where her head had been. She landed hard, pain flaring through her ribs, but she didn't slow. Pain was information, nothing more. She ducked into a stairwell, breath controlled, mind already rewiring. Sniper to operator, distance to closeness, precision to chaos. The building smelled like mold and old smoke. The kind of place people forgot about until violence reminded them it existed. Inside, the sound changed. Gunfire became deafening, every step echoed, every corner mattered. She moved down 2 flights and caught movement through a broken doorway. A hostile turned just as she appeared. Surprise widened his eyes. He went down before fear finished forming. Her heart rate barely changed. That scared her sometimes. She found the team clustered near the factory entrance, backs to a wall, breathing hard. Blood soaked into concrete. The asset was there too, hands zip-tied, eyes wide, very aware that his life balanced on strangers. The team leader looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time, not as a symbol, not as an exception, as a solution. We can't hold, he said. I know, she replied. We're not going to. She glanced at the clock in her head. 15 minutes since first contact. Everything meaningful happened in windows like that. She pointed toward a service corridor. They expect us to retreat the way we came. We won't. No one argued. That was new. Why did she feel more alone once they started listening? They moved through the corridor in a staggered line, weapons up, senses stretched thin. The wounded man groaned softly, each sound slicing through the tension. She stayed at the rear, covering, counting footsteps, reading echoes. Her mind flickered, unwanted, back to another corridor. Different country, different war, same smell of fear. Back when a man had laughed and said, "You're too small for this." Back when she'd believed him just long enough for it to hurt. She shoved the memory down. Now wasn't the time. A door burst open ahead of them. Hostiles poured in. Chaos compressed into seconds. She stepped forward, body low, firing controlled bursts, directing the team with sharp, simple words. Left. Down, now. Someone hesitated. She grabbed his vest and yanked him back, just as a round tore through the space where his head had been. Move, she said, not angry, not kind, final. They moved. They always did after that tone. The corridor emptied. The silence afterward rang louder than gunfire. The team regrouped, shaken but intact. The asset stared at her like she was something unreal. You're hurt, one of them said, noticing blood on her sleeve. Later, she replied. She checked her ammo. Low but manageable. Everything was always manageable until it was. The extraction point was 3 blocks south. Open ground. No cover. The worst possible place for people already exhausted. She studied the map, then the street, then the team. She saw doubt trying to creep back in. She cut it off before it took root. "We go now," she said. "Together, slow as dead." The team leader nodded without question. That, more than anything, twisted something in her chest. Why did victory feel like a burden instead of relief? The bird came in hot, rotors shredding the air. The militia made one last desperate push, firing wildly, anger replacing strategy. She laid down her last rounds, then pulled the wounded man aboard with strength she didn't remember having. When the ramp closed and the aircraft lifted, the city fell away beneath them, reduced to lights and shadows and things left unresolved. Inside, no one spoke. Adrenaline drained, leaving only exhaustion and something like shame. She leaned back against the hull, eyes closed, ribs aching now that she let them. Someone offered her water. She accepted with a nod. The team leader finally broke the silence. "You saved us." She opened her eyes, looked at him, really looked. "No," she said, "I did my job." He didn't argue. That was progress. As the aircraft cut through the dark, she wondered, briefly, if this moment would change anything. If next time, another woman wouldn't have to earn belief with blood and near misses. She didn't let herself hope too much. Hope, like underestimation, could be dangerous. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the scars and discipline, something stirred. Not pride, not triumph, just the quiet knowledge that, when it mattered, she had acted. And sometimes, that was enough to shift the weight of the world, just a little. Why did the quiet after extraction feel louder than the firefight itself? The aircraft vibrated beneath her like a living thing, metal skin shuddering as it climbed away from the city. Red cabin lights washed everyone in the same color, blood without context, danger without blame. The wounded man had gone still, sedated now, his breathing shallow but steady. Medics worked in practiced silence, their movements efficient, impersonal. Survival reduced to procedure. She sat with her back against the bulkhead, helmet resting between her boots, hands folded loosely in her lap. They were trembling, not from fear, from release. No one noticed. They were too busy replaying their own near misses, their own moments of panic and luck. She had learned early that the aftermath was always lonelier than the fight itself. During chaos, everyone needed you. Afterward, they didn't quite know what to do with you. The team leader stood near the ramp, staring at nothing. His shoulders sagged now, the weight of command settling in after the adrenaline burned off. He turned once, as if to speak, then thought better of it. She was grateful. Words right now would cheapen something. The city vanished into darkness below. Another place, another mission marked complete. On paper, it would read clean. Successful extraction, minimal casualties, enemy force neutralized. A box ticked. Paper never captured the truth. She closed her eyes and felt the ache in her ribs bloom into something sharp and insistent. It was fine. Pain was familiar. Pain meant she was still here. What unsettled her was the memory of the moment they'd started listening. Not because she wanted authority, but because it came so late. Why did respect always arrive only after survival was already uncertain? Back at base, the debrief room smelled like stale coffee and recycled air. Screens lit the walls, paused drone footage frozen mid-chaos. The intelligence officer spoke in clipped sentences, pointing out angles, decisions, timestamps. She watched herself on the screen, moving, firing, signaling. From the outside, it looked clean, controlled, almost calm. Inside, she remembered the doubt, the calculations, the quiet fear she'd never voiced. If I'm wrong, they die. No one mentioned the comment from the briefing room. No one referenced the laughter. The jokes had vanished like they'd never existed, absorbed into the official narrative. That too was familiar. The commander nodded as the after-action report concluded. "Good work," he said, eyes landing on her for half a second longer than the others. "Exceptional situational awareness." Exceptional. A word that both elevated and isolated. Afterward, the team filtered out in clusters. Low voices, nervous laughter. She lingered, packing her gear slowly, deliberately, giving herself time to feel the come-down without witnesses. Someone stopped in the doorway. It was the same man who'd muttered the comment before the mission, younger than her by a few years, broad shoulders, the kind of confidence that hadn't been tested often. He shifted his weight, cleared his throat. "Hey." She looked up. "I owe you an apology," he said. His voice wavered just enough to make it real. "What I said earlier, before the op." She waited. "I didn't know," he added quickly. "I mean, I didn't understand." She studied his face, saw the discomfort, the genuine effort, the crack in something rigid. "I know," she said again, the same words as before, same tone. He frowned. That's all." She zipped her bag closed and stood, ribs protesting. "That's all you're ready for?" He nodded slowly, as if absorbing something heavier than he'd expected. When he stepped aside to let her pass, it wasn't performative. It was instinctive. That mattered more than the apology. Why did the mission follow her home, even when the noise was gone? Her quarters were small, functional. Bed, locker, desk. Nothing personal except a single photograph tucked inside a drawer. She hadn't looked at it in months. She didn't plan to tonight. She stripped off her gear, movement slow now, deliberate. Bruises surfaced in the mirror, dark blooms beneath skin. She pressed a hand against her ribs and breathed through the flare. The silence pressed in. That was when it started. Not a flashback, not a full memory, just fragments. A streetlight flickering, a voice laughing. The weight of someone underestimating how far she'd go to survive. She sat on the edge of the bed and let it pass through her without resistance. Fighting memories only made them sharper. She learned that the hard way. 15 minutes, she thought again. That was all it had taken back then, too. She lay back and stared at the ceiling, counting breaths until her body remembered where it was. The bass hummed around her, alive, indifferent. Somewhere down the hall, someone laughed. She closed her eyes. Why did command summon her when the praise hadn't even settled yet? The next morning she was called in early. No explanation, just a message waiting when she woke. Command offices were always colder than they needed to be. Designed that way, comfort softened edges, cold sharpened them. The commander gestured for her to sit. "There's been chatter," he said. She said nothing. "Your performance last night didn't go unnoticed," he continued. "Not just by us." She lifted her gaze slightly. "There's a unit," he said. "Smaller, quieter. Missions that don't make reports until long after they're over, sometimes never." She understood immediately. The kind of work that lived in the gray, where deniability mattered more than medals. "They're asking for you." Asking. That word landed heavier than any praise. "And the team?" she asked. "They'll continue without you." She nodded once. This was the pattern. Exceptional women were never absorbed, they were extracted. "Think about it," the commander said. "You've earned the right to choose." She almost laughed. Earned? Choice was always relative. "I'll let you know," she said, standing. As she left the office, she felt something unfamiliar stirring beneath the discipline and scars. Not excitement. Apprehension. Because she knew what units like that demanded. And she knew what they took. Why did the path forward feel like both escape and erasure? She walked the perimeter of the base later, boots crunching gravel, sun low on the horizon. The world felt muted, like everything was happening behind glass. She thought of the team she'd left behind, of the moment they'd finally trusted her, of how quickly that trust had arrived, and how quickly it could disappear once she was gone. She thought of the women who would come after her, who would still have to prove themselves in moments where failure meant death. She stopped walking. This was the real conflict, not missions, not enemies. Visibility versus impact. Stay visible, change minds slowly, bleed quietly. Or disappear into the work that mattered most, where results spoke but names didn't. She exhaled. The sky darkened. Lights flickered on across the base. Somewhere another briefing was happening, another room full of assumptions. She already knew what she would choose. Not because it was easier, but because it was necessary. Sometimes, the strongest act wasn't staying where you were finally seen. It was stepping into places where you would never be seen at all, so others wouldn't have to fight the same battles you did. And that decision, she knew, would cost her more than bruises. It always did. Why did the acceptance feel heavier than any rejection she had ever survived? The message came just before dawn. No flourish, no ceremony, a time, a location, instructions stripped to the bone. She read it once, then deleted it, committing every detail to memory the way she'd been trained. When you stepped into work like this, you didn't leave footprints. You learned to exist without echo. The compound sat beyond the outer edge of the base, separated by distance and intention. No signage, no visible guards, just a gate that opened after facial recognition confirmed what paperwork never would. She walked in carrying nothing but herself. Inside, the air felt different, quieter, controlled, the kind of silence built from discipline, not absence. A woman met her halfway across the yard, older, hard-eyed, no insignia, the kind of presence that didn't need introduction. "You're late," the woman said. "No," she replied calmly, "I'm early." A flicker of something, approval maybe, passed across the woman's face. They didn't shake hands. They never did here. Why did training feel less about skill and more about unlearning? Days blurred into cycles of exhaustion, and this unit didn't shout, didn't posture. They observed. They watched how she moved when she thought no one was paying attention, how she responded when plans shifted without warning, how she carried failure. The physical trials were brutal but not flashy. Long movements under weight, problem-solving under oxygen debt, hours of stillness followed by sudden demand. Anyone could perform when adrenaline was high. This place measured who you were when it was. She felt herself stripped down, not of strength but of habits, old reflexes questioned, old confidence dismantled piece by piece. It was unsettling, necessary. One night, during a navigation exercise in terrain that offered no landmarks, she froze. Just for a moment. The sky had gone black with clouds. Her compass needle jittered. Radio silence pressed in. The old anxiety crept up, whispering doubts she thought she'd buried. "You don't belong here." She stood there breathing, heart thudding, aware that somewhere unseen, someone was watching. She closed her eyes. Then she did the thing she'd learned the hard way, over years of being underestimated. She trusted herself. Step by step she recalibrated, not by force, by patience, by listening to the world instead of fighting it. She reached the checkpoint late, but intact. No one commented. That silence meant she'd passed. Why did she start to disappear the more capable she became? Her name stopped appearing on rosters, her face vanished from briefings, even the language changed. No she, no operator, just tasks assigned to roles without identity. At first, it felt like erasure. Then she realized it was protection. Invisibility was currency here. The less people knew you existed, the safer you were, the more effective you could be. Still, some nights lying awake on a narrow bunk, she felt the ache of it, the human need to be seen, to be acknowledged. She fought so hard for recognition once. Now she was learning to let it go. That wasn't strength. It was sacrifice. Why did the mission brief sound too familiar to be coincidence? When they finally briefed her for deployment, the image on the screen made her stomach tighten. Same region, same fractured industrial zones, different city, same patterns. This cell adapts fast, the older woman said. They learned from the last engagement. From us, she thought. From me. Her role was narrow and deep. Recon, pattern disruption, quiet removal, no team this time, just integration with local assets and one extraction window that would not wait. She nodded, absorbing details, feeling the old calm settle in. But beneath it, something else stirred. Responsibility. If she failed here, others would pay for lessons not learned. Why did isolation sharpen her senses instead of dulling them? The city swallowed her the moment she stepped into it. Different language, different rhythms, same undercurrent of fear. She moved through crowds unnoticed, posture adjusted, expression neutral. She had learned how to be small when needed. At night she climbed. Rooftops became her home again, not with a team this time. No voices in her ear, just wind, optics, and instinct. She mapped movement over days, learned who belonged, who didn't, who watched and who acted. She felt alive in a way that both comforted and unsettled her. This was where she was most herself. And that realization scared her. Why did the confrontation come without warning? It happened on the fourth night, a deviation in the pattern, a presence where there shouldn't have been one. She sensed it before she saw it. Another watcher. Her pulse slowed, she didn't rush. She adjusted position, shadow to shadow, letting the city breathe around her. The other presence moved well, too well to be local. A hunter. For a long moment they circled each other without contact. A silent conversation of angles and restraint. She could disengage, fade away, mission intact. Instead, she chose to resolve it. The encounter was fast, controlled, bodies close, breath loud in the dark. She disarmed him with precision born of training and necessity. He collapsed unconscious, alive. She didn't linger. Back in her safe location, she sat in the dark and let the adrenaline drain, hands steady, mind sharp. This was the work now. Not proving anything. Not being seen. Just acting, cleanly and without applause. Why did she finally understand what strength really meant? As the extraction signal pulsed quietly on her device hours later, she looked out over the sleeping city. Somewhere, people laughed. Somewhere, someone underestimated someone else. She thought of the woman she'd been, the one who needed to be believed. She thought of the woman she was becoming, the one who no longer needed permission. Strength, she realized, wasn't loud. It wasn't even visible. It was the willingness to do what was necessary, even when no one would ever know your name. And as she disappeared into the dawn, she carried that truth with her. Steady, silent, and unbreakable. Why did the mission begin to feel personal the moment she recognized the pattern? The extraction went clean, almost too clean. No pursuit, no last-minute scramble, just a quiet lift into the gray morning and then distance, the city shrinking until it looked harmless again. That should have brought relief. It didn't. Back at the safe transit site, she replayed what she'd seen. Movement timings, guard rotations. The way the hostile watcher had mirrored her pace before she'd taken him down. This wasn't just adaptation. It was anticipation. Someone was studying them. She reported the details without embellishment. Facts only. Angles, probabilities. The older woman listened without interrupting, eyes sharp, already running parallel calculations. They're learning faster, the woman said finally, or someone's teaching them. That thought followed her into the next phase of operations, settling into her chest like a low-grade ache. This was no longer about one cell or one city. It was about momentum, who learned faster, who adjusted cleaner, who made fewer emotional mistakes. She'd been underestimated by individuals before. Being underestimated by an enemy with resources was different. Why did fatigue arrive only when she stopped moving? Days blurred again, new locations, new cover identities, long hours of observation punctuated by moments of precise violence that left no trace but absence. She moved through it all with the same controlled calm, but her body kept score. Micro-fractures of exhaustion, muscles that took longer to loosen, sleep that stayed shallow no matter how tired she was. One night, she misjudged a jump between rooftops by inches. She landed hard, pain flaring up her ankle, sharp enough to steal her breath. She lay still in the dark, teeth clenched, listening for any sign she'd been noticed. Nothing, just the city breathing around her. When she finally stood, weight sent another spike through her leg. She adjusted, redistributed, continued. There was no one to call for backup, no one to trade off with. This work assumed you could carry yourself, broken or not. Later, safe again, she wrapped the ankle tightly and sat with the pain instead of medicating it away. Pain told the truth. It reminded her she was human, not a machine built for endless output. She wondered briefly how many operators mistook endurance for invincibility. She didn't plan to be one of them. Why did the next target refuse to remain just a name? The intel packet was thin, a facilitator, mid-level, responsible for moving information between cells, not charismatic, not ideological, just efficient. Those were always the most dangerous. She watched him for 3 days. He drank tea on a balcony every morning at the same time, spoke to his daughter on the phone every evening, voice softening in a way that felt almost obscene given what he enabled. People were rarely monsters all the way through. That was the uncomfortable truth. On the 4th night, she positioned herself with a clear line and waited. The shot would be easy. Her finger rested against the trigger, pressure measured, breath aligned. She'd taken more difficult shots under worse conditions. This should have been automatic. It was. Her mind betrayed her with an image of the team pinned down weeks earlier, of panic spreading because someone had assumed competence where there was none, of how close it had all come. She exhaled and finished the motion. The facilitator collapsed quietly, teacup shattering on tile. She stayed scoped for long seconds afterward, watching the ripples spread through the small, human scene she'd just ended. She didn't feel guilt. Guilt implied choice between good and evil. This was choice between bad and worse. Still, it stayed with her. Why did command silence worry her more than bad news ever had? After the op, there was a delay, no immediate tasking, no follow-on movement, just waiting. Waiting was dangerous. She ran drills alone, limited by her ankle but unwilling to go still. Stillness invited reflection, and reflection could soften edges that needed to stay sharp. She caught herself replaying earlier moments, faces from past missions, words spoken in ignorance that had almost cost lives. She thought about the first team again, about how quickly laughter had turned to dependence, about how fragile respect built under fire really was. A message finally came through, brief, coded, urgent. New intel, high confidence, time-sensitive. She felt the familiar tightening in her chest, not fear but focus. This was why they'd pulled her into this unit. Why did the final approach feel eerily calm? The location was a transit hub masquerading as something civilian, layers of security disguised as routine, the kind of place people pass through without seeing, trusting normalcy to protect them. She embedded herself early, posture relaxed, movements forgettable. She blended easily now, too easily. As she waited, she felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching herself from a distance. The work had stripped something away, not compassion but attachment. She understood the necessity. She just wasn't sure yet what the cost would be. Her target arrived late, surrounded, confident. She adjusted. The plan shifted in real time, variables updating with each step he took. She followed at a distance, heart steady, ankle screaming but controlled. This would be close. No rifle, no distance, just timing and nerve. Inside a service corridor, she moved. The confrontation lasted seconds. A blur of motion, leverage, breath. He fought harder than expected. Training showed. So did desperation. She neutralized him with practiced efficiency, pressure points, and restraint, leaving him alive but finished. As she secured the intel he carried, he looked at her, not with hatred but recognition. "You," he rasped, "you're the one." The words chilled her more than any threat. She left him there and vanished into the flow of the building before questions could form. Why did the revelation hit harder than any wound? Back in cover, reviewing the intel, the pattern snapped into place. Names, dates, training exchanges. Someone inside the system was leaking methodologies, not locations, principles, teaching adversaries how to think like them, how to adapt, how to anticipate. The enemy hadn't just learned from her last mission. They'd been coached. She sent the data up the chain, knowing the fallout would be quiet and brutal. Careers ended, trust shattered, entire units restructured. This was the kind of truth organizations hated. She leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes, exhaustion finally crashing through discipline. She thought of all the moments she'd been dismissed, all the warnings ignored, all the times silence had been mistaken for weakness. And now, here she was, carrying knowledge that could save lives or end careers depending on how it was handled. Responsibility settled on her shoulders again, heavier than before. Not because she was special, but because she was paying attention. Why did she realize, finally, that redemption wasn't about being seen? As the extraction window opened and she prepared to move, she felt a quiet resolve take hold. Not pride, not anger. Clarity. She didn't need validation from teams or commanders or history. The work itself was the measure. The lives quietly diverted from disaster because someone had noticed, had acted, had endured. She adjusted her gear, ignoring the pain, and stepped back into motion. Invisible, effective, necessary. Sometimes redemption didn't come as forgiveness or recognition. Sometimes it came as the certainty that, when the moment demanded action, she had answered, without hesitation, without applause, and without needing anyone to believe in her first. Why did the final call arrive when she was already preparing to disappear? It came encrypted, priority marked, stripped of sentiment. A convergence point, a window measured in minutes, not hours. The kind of message that meant the situation had moved past containment and into consequence. She read it once. Then she sat still. Not because she hesitated, but because she understood what it meant. The leak hadn't just been identified. It had been activated. Someone somewhere had realized the net was tightening and decided to burn everything on the way out. That kind of desperation only surfaced when people thought they were untouchable, or when they were afraid. She rose, ignoring the protest from her ankle, and began preparing without hurry. Gear checked, routes memorized, exits planned and discarded. This wasn't a mission that allowed for improvisation. It demanded presence, precision, finality. As she moved, she thought about the first time she'd been laughed at in a briefing room. How small that moment had seemed then. How insignificant. And yet here it was, threaded all the way through to this night. Underestimation wasn't just personal. It was systemic. And systems failed in patterns. Why did the meeting place feel like a memory before it even happened? The location was a coastal industrial site long written off as obsolete. Salt-stained concrete. Rusted cranes froze in mid-lift like monuments to abandonment. Waves slapped against pylons below, steady and indifferent. She arrived early, always early. From her vantage point, she watched the area wake and settle again. Vehicles passed. A guard shift changed. Everything looked ordinary enough to lull someone careless into comfort. She wasn't careless. Her breathing slowed as she aligned herself with the rhythm of the place. Observation wasn't passive. It was dialogue. The environment always spoke. You just had to listen without imposing what you wanted to hear. The contact arrived alone. That was the first mistake. He walked with confidence born of insulation. Someone used to layers of protection, now stripped down by urgency. He scanned the area, eyes sharp, posture tight. He didn't see her. No one ever did at first. She let him reach the marked point before she moved, stepping out of shadow into dim light, weapon low but unmistakable, not rushed, not aggressive. Just present. He startled, then recovered, forced a smile that didn't quite settle. "You're not who I expected," he said. She considered that. "No," she replied, "I rarely am." Why did the truth unravel faster than lies ever could? He tried to talk first. Explanations, rationalizations, the language of people who believed context could absolve consequence. He spoke about necessity, about balance, about how information always moved whether sanctioned or not. She let him speak, not because she needed to hear it, but because people revealed more when they believed they were still being judged. When he finally paused, waiting for a reaction, she met his eyes. "You taught them how to think," she said quietly. His jaw tightened. "I leveled the field." "You sharpened the blade," she corrected, "and pointed it at people who trusted you." Something flickered then, fear finally breaking through arrogance. "You don't understand the pressure," he said, "what it's like to be ignored, to have your warnings dismissed." The words landed heavier than any threat. Ignored. Dismissed. She felt the symmetry settle into place with a strange, almost sorrowful clarity. "I understand exactly," she said. He took a step back. That was his second mistake. Why did the confrontation feel less like victory and more like closure? He moved for his weapon, too slow. Desperation dulled precision. She closed the distance in a breath, redirecting his arm, unbalancing him with a movement so economical it barely registered as violence. They went down hard. The ground stole his breath. She pinned him, pressure exact, unavoidable. He struggled, then stilled, realization setting in. "This doesn't end with me," he rasped. "No," she agreed, "but it ends because of you." She secured him, methodical, impersonal. There was no anger left in her, no satisfaction, just the weight lifting, slowly, reluctantly. As she stood, she felt the ache in her body fully now, every bruise, every strain, the accumulation of years spent proving, surviving, adapting. She keyed the extraction signal and waited. Why did she think of everyone else in that final quiet? As the sound of approaching rotors cut through the night, she looked out over the water. The horizon blurred into darkness, indistinguishable from sky. She thought of the team from that first mission, of how close they'd come to disaster because someone had mistaken confidence for competence. She hoped they were safer now, smarter, less willing to dismiss what they didn't immediately understand. She thought of the women still moving through briefing rooms where laughter disguised uncertainty, where silence was mistaken for weakness. She thought of herself, earlier versions layered beneath the one standing here now. The girl who had been told she didn't belong. The operator who learned to let silence work for her. The woman who no longer needed anyone to believe in her to act. The aircraft touched down. Figures moved quickly, efficiently. The man was taken without ceremony, evidence secured, words exchanged that carried weight but no warmth. As she boarded last, the older woman caught her eye and nodded once. That was all. That was everything. Why did the end feel quieter than the beginning? Back at the compound, there were no speeches, no acknowledgments beyond a brief confirmation that the leak was contained. The system would recalibrate. It always did. She returned her gear, signed nothing, left no trace beyond memory. In her quarters, she sat on the edge of the bed and let the exhaustion finally claim her. Not collapse, just surrender. The kind that came after something truly finished. She opened the drawer and took out the photograph at last, looked at it without flinching, then placed it back. Some things didn't need revisiting anymore. Outside, dawn crept in, pale and unassuming. Another day beginning without knowledge of how close it had come to unraveling. She stood, stretched carefully, and felt a calm settle in that she hadn't known before. Not relief. Resolution. Why did she understand, finally, what strength had always been? It wasn't volume. It wasn't recognition. It wasn't the moment people finally stopped laughing. Strength was noticing what others missed and acting anyway. It was carrying responsibility without demanding credit. It was enduring silence without letting it harden you. She stepped out into the morning, anonymous among many, and let herself blend back into the world she helped hold together. No one stopped her. No one saluted. No one needed to know. And that was the point. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.